My name is Bob Plaschke. Welcome to First Response. For most of my professional life, I've had the privilege to spend time with and serve emergency responders, folks who are called, who kind of run toward danger when the rest of us kind of run away from it. Firefighters, police officers, corrections officers, EMTs. I started First Response as an effort to try to get behind the badge, so to speak, and understand the highs and lows that these emergency responders face and the challenges that they face and how they handle them. This podcast is sponsored by pepperball.com, which I have the honor to serve as the CEO. Pepperball makes a non-lethal alternative to guns that police and correction officers use on a day-to-day basis that keeps them and the public they serve safe. If you want to learn more about Pepperball, please go to pepperball.com. Today, I'm super excited to talk a lot about prisons and places where folks are sent to serve time for crimes they commit against society. It's a topic that was pretty uncomfortable to me when I first started to work with folks in this, but as I've gotten to know it more and better, I just really appreciate and respect the men and women that serve in this capacity in terms of managing and the prisons across the United States. Today, my guest is Mike Cantrell. Mike Cantrell is the retired 30 years in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, retired as a chief in that organization, a pretty senior position. And today, Mike tries to educate as well by running the prisonerofficer.com and the Prisoner Officer podcast. Mike, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for spending some time with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me, Bob.
We should say, just as a kind of disclaimer, Mike is an instructor for Pepperball and has and puts on Pepperball classes and teaches people how to use Pepperball, and that's actually how I got to meet Mike. But again, not talking about Pepperball today. We're going to talk about corrections. Mike, tell me, we see on TV and films a lot of generally negative images about the corrections in the United States. We hear, Rikers Island on Blue Bloods, and it's kind of a place you don't want to go. How bad is it in prisons and jails today? How rough is it? And what is the thing that needs to get done to make it a safer place?
Wow. Um, well, you know, what is portrayed in the movies is always a maximum security prison. That's when they talk in the movies or they show TV, it's always this total violence like you'd see in a maximum security prison. And that doesn't make up the entirety of our prisons in the US. Um, yes, we have maximum security prisons, and yes, they're violent, and we can talk about that absolutely. But I think it gets missed by the public as a whole that there's a lot of medium security prisons out there. There's minimum security prisons. Those are full of a lot of inmates who are going to be back out one of these days. They're going to be your neighbor. They're going to live in your neighborhood. And so, of course, rehabilitation and, reentry has become a big thing with that section of the inmates. They need social skills, they need work skills, and that's what the prison systems do at those lower levels is try to get those guys prepared to go back out and be a good neighbor or a good, father, even a good mother. They do a lot of that in there. Now, when you take a look at what's shown on TV, that is the violent penitentiaries. That is where our gang members are at. That's where the people who have grown up violent and aren't probably going to change anytime soon are housed. And, you
Well,
know, as
let me.
far as
Well,
changing that, I don't know that we can. We manage that very well, but I would love to see the public understand the sacrifices that are made by some of the correctional staff that work in those places. So,
Well, and what you're saying is that kind of just the nature of the folks that are in those maximum security prisons make it so that there's not, and to some degree, it's just trying to keep people safe, including the corrections officers themselves. And it's
Uh,
not, it's there's only so much you can do. Well, you make an interesting point. One of the things that Mike told me as we were preparing for this discussion is that there's over 1.9 million men and women incarcerated in the United States, which it feels like a staggering number. And what I guess I heard you say is that of the 1.9 million, we shouldn't assume that, we should assume the vast majority of those are nonviolent. Is that a fair statement to make?
Non-violent, or at least violence isn't, their entire life. There's a portion, and those are the people in the maximum security prisons. And I think this is where the public gets it wrong sometimes, is they think that if you put enough money and you get them a GED and you talk to them the right way, that there's people out there who want to get out and go get a job. And there's people in those maximum security prisons, and violence is their life. They've grown up with it since they were little. A lot of it, they came out of bad areas of big cities and stuff, or been involved in a family that's had drugs their whole life. They've been involved in gangs since as long as they can remember. And those people have no plans whatsoever of getting out and getting a job and drawing Social Security one of these days. That's just that's not in their game plan. Um, those are the top, those are the violent ones. But and I don't know what the percentage would be. I'd say 60%, maybe even higher, up to 70% of your inmates are inmates who aren't violent at that level. They're going to come back into society at some level. Now, they may not be completely productive, but they are going to come back in and they are going to live in your neighborhood someday. So it's something we got to deal with, and we got to prepare them for and prepare ourselves for.
So you've been doing this for a long time. This is 30 plus years. And
Mm.
if I remember correctly, did you start in a federal prison or did you start in a state or county jail? How did you how did your career start?
Well, it's kind of funny because I had been working overseas at a military base as a cook, and I came back on leave, and I fell in love, and I'm still married to her. And but
Amen to that.
we decided we were going to have a family, and I needed to get a job, closer to home that, had good benefits. And I applied as a cook at Missouri State Pen. I saw it in the newspaper. And about a week later, a lady calls me from HR and she says, "We don't need cooks." She said, "We need COs." And I said, "Well, what's a CO?" I didn't know. I'd never been around corrections, had never met a correctional officer. My father was a firefighter, and I grew up with firefighters and EMTs and police officers and dispatchers. I knew those guys, but I'd never met a correctional officer. And so I needed the job and I took it. And that was the beginning. I started at Missouri State Pen. And at that time, Missouri State Pen, Time Life had called them the bloodiest 47 acres in America. I didn't just stick my foot in a little bit. I jumped
You
into a
could have
boiling
jumped right
pot of
in.
water. Yeah. And saw stuff within the first few weeks that most people will never see in their lifetime.
How do you? I mean, you can't prepare, and when and I'll ask you to describe as best you can, but you probably can't prepare for that. It must be just mentally overwhelming. I know I talk to firefighters, and they talk about seeing their first car accident, or a police officer seeing the first kind of use of firearms. It's very jarring. I would imagine it's the same in that context. Although in a maximum security prison, you're seeing, to your point, that small percentage of very violent folks. What did you see in those first couple of weeks? I have to ask.
Um, I saw a stabbing, a violent stabbing with one guy sitting on top of another guy and stabbing him in the chest within just a couple of weeks. Um, I saw a suicide where a guy had cut his femoral arteries. And that was the first time I remember being shocked. And I've kind of talked about it before, but I uh, I mean I grew up on a farm, and I had, well, we butchered our own hogs. We, chickens. I had hunted deer my entire life and skinned deer and stuff. So I'd been around blood and stuff. But stepping in that cell that day, and the blood came up over the soles of my shoes from that. And I had never seen human blood like that in that amounts. And that kind of made me take a step back and go, wow, I didn't even know that was possible. And I remember that hanging around with me for a while. Um, you don't prepare for it. Um, you're, I think one of the things you're most overwhelmed with, and one of the things that affects you the longest, is the manipulation that goes on. Because when you go to work inside, from the moment you step inside, there's people trying to manipulate you. Whether and that may be nothing more than getting an extra tray at lunch, and it may be as much as bringing in cigarettes and stuff like that that they're trying to get you to do. I walked a pretty straight and narrow path, so I didn't have a lot of that, but it didn't stop the fact that it happened. And as that happens, 16 hours a day, long enough, then you walk back out in the public and you think everybody's manipulating you. And so I think that's what people see from us a lot. When we'd go to Boy Scout functions, my wife would walk over and she'd go, "Stop your correctional officer pose. Quit
And what
standing
is
there
that?
with your arms crossed, with your
Ah,
back to the wall."
okay. Well, because that's how you lived your life, right? That's how you live your day
Yeah,
to day life. When you talk about
sure.
manipulation, you talk about inmates befriending you, or at least giving you the illusion of befriending you in an effort to try to gain some type of advantage. I assume is when you talk about manipulation, or is there other ways
Sure.
of being?
Yeah, there's multiple ways that they do it. Some of it is, there's a lot to it. It's not, it's a concerted effort among several inmates because number one, they scope you out. They try to gain information, anything. And that's why we're very careful about what we bring into work. You never put a picture of your wife on your desk or, some people don't even wear wedding rings and stuff because they don't want the inmates to know they're married. Um, so it's that kind of stuff where they gain information and then try to use that to befriend you. You have a orderly that's the best orderly ever. And then sometimes it'll be, and I've seen this happen, especially with younger staff, where a big inmate will come up and, he'll tell them, "Hey, you either do this or we're going to come in here and beat you up." And, the officer may think, "Well, you can't do that. I'm an officer." Well, I can do it for 2 or 3 minutes. You're not you're working this housing unit, one officer and 100 inmates, and then you'll have another inmate that'll step in there and go, "Hey, leave him alone. That guy's a good guy. I got him. I'm covering him." And so what a lot of guys don't realize is that second inmate, that was the whole plan, was to make him look good in your eyes so that you'll trust him. And so they do stuff like that all the time, and it's something I've taught rookies over the years to be able to watch out for.
Now, part of this, I assume, is relegated to these federal prisons, these maximum security prisons, where folks are in for for decades, where there's no to your point, it's rehabilitation is not the discussion. It's kind of it's their life, and they're trying to optimize it inside those four walls, so to speak.
Hmm.
Is that fair to say? Fair to say that this is more of a this isn't what you see in a county jail because people are not spending a long time there. This is where folks spend years and years and years. This is the kind of the
Right, and you're talking
Shawshank issue.
absolutely. Yeah,
By
a
the way,
federal or a state prison. Yeah.
how and what Mike has told me is that there's 122 federal prisons across the United States. Just for facts, there's 1,500 state prisons, which is a lot. You think
Mhm.
about across 50 states, so that's a fair number. There's 3,100 jails, which are small, that I think are typically holding cell. Kind of they hold you for to transport you. You're there until you go through your sentencing or you go through the trial. Is that
Yeah.
typically what the jails are
Sometimes
for?
you can do months there. It depends on your trial and stuff. And now some of those county jails are Cook County Jail, and Cook County Jail's bigger than most prisons, most state prisons.
Well, I guess you're right.
Those are huge operations.
Rikers would fall into that category.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I've actually been, Mike. I've been to Rikers twice,
Oh, interesting.
and for those who, I'm sure the majority of people who would listen to this have never been to Rikers, but it is an island. It is right next to it's an island that's right next to the airport, next to LaGuardia, which is kind of on its own little island. And you drive over a little kind of one way in, one way out, and with a bunch of fences in between, and you do feel kind of isolated there. It's kind of a little bit of like oh, what's the I'm trying to think of the not San Quentin, but what's the
Alcatraz.
Alcatraz?
Yeah,
Alcatraz. It has an Alcatraz
Alcatraz is an island.
with kind of feel to it, and it is, to your point, you can feel the tension in that context. So with all of these, I assume that in the issues you would deal with in a federal corrections facility are different, I assume, than state and local, or are they that different? I assume it's different environments, different populations.
Um, the main difference between federal and state is federal prosecutors kind of get to pick their prosecutions. So, yeah, the states and federal prisons have both the same type of crimes, but the federal ones kind of pick and choose. So you're going to see a lot more high profile, a lot less of your, um, what's a nice way to put it? The lower portions of society, um, may just get left to the state to prosecute. And the federal prison system also has a lot more money than most of the states do, and so that's a big difference. The I think $8.3 billion for the federal prison system last year, and I haven't seen the upcoming one, but that's a lot of money, and those state systems don't have that.
How many inmates are in federal prisons? Just a
Oh
guess.
wow, I think it's right, and don't quote me specifically. We dropped the number. I think it's around 150 to 160,000 right now.
And $8 billion a year is spent on those folks. That's that is boy, that is close to $800,000. It almost feels like it's $800,000 a year if I've done my math right.
Yeah, you could buy each inmate a mansion for what we spend.
And of that money, I assume the majority of it's spent on staff. I assume corrections folks to guard those folks, or is it spent?
A big portion is staff salaries. Absolutely. That's a big portion of it. I think the federal system also has the ability to do a lot more training because of that bigger budget. So you get more money spent on that. But a large portion of that is spent on the inmates. You know, most places other than federal don't have the resources to have the number of counselors, the number of psychologists, the number of psychiatrists, the number of religious leaders, all that stuff that falls into teachers. We have a lot more staff in that manner. As far as correctional officers, it's probably about the same number of correctional officers to run the prison as it would be somewhere else. But yeah, when you come into the federal system, you have a lot more of these other, um, um, entities that help the inmates.
and this, I assume, is it must be probably more weighted towards the those that have sentences that they will leave the facility and lead productive lives, as opposed to the folks who are in for life. I would imagine if you're in for life, it's just
Mm,
basically providing the basics, or no? Do you provide the health care and
uh,
whatnot, or no?
yeah.
Maybe not.
Now, whether or not they do it or not is up to them. But there's a lot of mandates with federal law, like you have to have your GED to get out. So
You
even
have to.
with
I'm
the
sorry.
inmates who will probably never get out, there's still mandated programming for them.
You have to have a GED to be released.
Yeah. Yep. So if you don't have a GED, the first thing you're going to do when you come to prison is start going to GED classes, maximum or minimum.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yep.
And the goal is
And
to
educate.
to educate, to be able to
Yep.
be a productive member of the society.
Absolutely. That's the first step.
Interesting. And then obviously there's healthcare, and
Yep.
so the basic rights of of citizens. And I would imagine to your point that can you get a college degree in prison?
In some prisons, you can. It depends on what's offered where, what that prison has been able, what university that prison's been able to hook up with and do classes with. But yeah, most of them have some sort of college degree program or vocational program. There's programs out there that teach them how to weld, teach them HVAC, teach them get their CDL. So there's lots of opportunities out there.
You know, which is good to hear. So Mike, if I can imagine some folks listening to this may be skeptical. They might say, look, somebody like yourself who's kind of faced with years and years of this manipulation, years and years of violence, you become jaded, you become kind of hardened, and unfortunately, the way you treat inmates becomes not nice. That you are less than humane. This is kind of that, I think, knuckle draggers kind of context. You become almost as bad as the inmates.
Sure.
Does that happen? Is it do corrections officers kind of fall to the dark side and become just as bad as the inmates?
There are some, it's like any profession. You're going to be able to find, the people who fall off the edge and who are a problem, and you can find that in any profession. I've been doing this a long time, um, and I am so proud to have worked with around some of the most amazing people that put up with the most stuff and do it for the least amount of thank yous. And they're hidden. The correctional officers are hidden from the public, so everybody guesses, what we're really about. And then you end up with Orange is the New Black and the different shows and the movies that they show on television, and that's what people think we are. And professional correctional officers these days are well trained. Some of them are law enforcement officers. New Jersey and California come to mind quickly. They actually go through a full law enforcement academy and then they work inside a prison. Most academies, I'd say minimum academy is 3 weeks, but you've got lots of academies that go 12 weeks. And so they're producing good officers to go work inside and do a tough job. Um, so I don't know how we can I don't know how we ever get the media back on our side. And I think we've talked about this before in an earlier conversation, but I've saved several lives while I've worked in prison over the last 30 years. And, if a police officer saves a life out on the street, it's front page news. It's a regular thing. It happens every day across this country that a correctional officer stops a suicide or stops a stabbing and saves an inmate's life. But that never comes on nobody puts it on the newspaper. It's not on, the evening news. But one inmate, dies in custody from fentanyl poisoning, and it's the corrections fault. It's not the girlfriend who snuck it into the visiting room to the inmate. It's our fault because we didn't stop it. Or if an inmate does escape, out of 1.9 million inmates, one of them escapes, and it'll be on the news for the next 4 days. So the disparity there, I don't know how to change. I do know that there are great people who work inside, and that they're not knuckle draggers, and that they are more than prison guards. They they're I call it the backbone of the justice system. The law enforcement officers, they go out, they enforce the laws, they find people who break the laws, and they bring them to the judicial system, and the judicial system, they reach out there and they sentence them, and then they give them to us, and then we have to carry that weight of 20 years. I didn't deal with them for 5 minutes and turn them over to the jail. I didn't deal with them in court for a week and then turn them over to corrections. I'm going to have this person for the next, 5 years to 50 years. And so I say that we carry the weight of the justice system on our backs.
You say that, and it's something we have talked about previously, and that is, if I would think the average citizen doesn't know that there's 7,000-8,000 prisons out there, and to your point, they probably don't want to know. They don't want to know where they are. They don't want to know what happens inside, because it's kind of the scariest and the darkest part of the human existence is in that construct. It's kind of,
Mm-hmm.
it's the incentive not to do wrong things, right? Because that's what society kind of relegates you to if you do. And yet to your point, if we, the public, want to forget that those prisons and those inmates exist, we probably also want to forget that the correctional officers exist, and we don't
Yep.
want to think about it until you're forced to, which, to your point, like an escape or something bad goes wrong,
Yeah.
because you're the forgotten officer, so to speak.
Yep.
And
Our
and I,
presence kind of reminds everybody that there is a boogeyman out there. When you think about corrections officers, you have to think about prison, and that takes you right down the line to some of the most horrendous, violent people that exist on this earth. And so, in order to forget them, you got to kind of forget us, and that's how we get dropped off the side.
just a question that popped in my head. Have you ever? Is it possible to establish friendships or relationships with inmates? I mean, have you ever been able to do that? I appreciate under this massive, kind of specter of manipulation. Were you ever able to make friends with folks on the inside?
I won't call them friends because I can't have a friendship with them. They are my ward. By law, I am over them, and that's why you can't have a consensual sexual relationship with an inmate. When that happens, that's called rape because the correctional officer is always the supervisor, right? So there can never be any consensual uh, sex or anything like that. And there can't also be consensual friendships because I'm always in a position over the inmate and I have that power. With that said, I have worked well with many, many inmates who I could even respect as a person and the way they've changed themselves. I have had inmates who shook my hand on the way out the door because I won't shake their hand while we're in prison because I can't because of the position I have. But when I took them to receiving and discharge and they were headed out for the last time, I've had them shake my hand and say, I appreciate the example you set and the talks you had with me and that kind of thing. We're human, you know. I've had two inmates over the course of my career. I held their hand while they were dying. Nobody else was in that room. They didn't have family. They didn't have friends. The only thing they had was a correctional officer sitting next to them, and they wanted a human touch. And so I held their hand while they died and felt them go cold. We don't get seen for that part of it. Uh, there's a human side to what we do. And it's hard to explain because I can't ever let my guard down or be put in a position where they would be friends. But yes, there are inmates who I have been able to, communicate and respect their change and that type of stuff.
Wow, that's heavy. Heavy in the most positive way, and kind of even in the depths of the the most challenged existence. The human condition survives, and and you
Hmm.
can still find ways to connect even in the under the most difficult of circumstances. So, Mike, this has been great. Any last thoughts before I kind of thank you and wrap up the this discussion? Any last thoughts? Anything else that you'd want to convey?
Oh, just, if you do know a correctional officer, take the time to ask them. Let them talk once in a while. Suicide's one of the toughest things that we have to deal with, staff suicide, and it happens way too often um, around the country. It's just a tough thing for everybody involved. And some people just get in that darkness of working in prison and they don't see any light and they don't think they can make it any longer. So if you do know a correctional officer, reach out and talk to them. Say, "How are you doing?" And then listen for a few minutes. Let them get some of that off their chest, and let them be a friend to them. That's all I can say. Is help us out that way.
Well, in other words, yeah, make a connection that they can't make when they're on the job because they're not allowed to. To your point,
Sure.
they're under constant duress. They need their own kind of human connection, their own touch, so to speak. Well, Mike,
Yep.
again, this is Mike Cantrell, who runs a very popular podcast, The Prisoner Officer, and you can go to prisonerofficer.com. Now, Mike, and listen to him and hear more about the corrections industry. Mike Pepperball is our sponsor, the company that I'm proud to work 4 is going to donate to your favorite charity. Where do we need to send the check to?
The Correctional Peace Officers Association does a lot of good things for corrections officers. When an officer dies in the line of duty, they step up and support the family and stuff. So I'd like to pick that and have you guys send a little something to them.
Well, and we will do so. Again, this is Mike Cantrell. Mike, theprisonerofficer.com or the Prisoner Officer Podcast. Mike, thanks again so much for taking the time to talk with me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Bob. Have a great day.
Thank you. Well, folks, that wraps up this session or this podcast, First Response. This is actually my first podcast in this context. It's funny. I talk to, and I have the privilege and the honor of talking to corrections officers, police chiefs, fire chiefs, almost on a daily basis. And what I'm struck with is this kind of this dichotomy. They do things that we are either afraid or can't do. That 99% of the population can't or won't do. They run into danger. They deal with the most ugliest of situations, the most horrendous of situations, and they do it with a sense of purpose and a sense of honor. And yet, it's very difficult for them then to come home and share, right? Because in effect, they see the worst of humanity, the worst of calamity. Things of which we don't want to frankly hear about. It's kind of almost too scary. And so while they serve in honor, and we hopefully everyone who listens cherishes and respects and appreciates them, they do it in many, many ways a kind of a lonely existence, where only their brethren understand. It's kind of why they are such a close fraternity, such a close community, is that what they go through, they can only share with each other. Very difficult to share outside. So I will echo Mike's work, or not work, but Mike's words, and that is, if you do know a police officer, or even if you see one having lunch, or a corrections officer or a firefighter, that you just stop over and say thanks for your service, which I try to do. And I think they appreciate it, and it's a little bit less, at least they have a connection with all the people that they serve. So that's it for me. Super grateful to be able to work and with and support emergency responders. It's my passion. Appreciate pepperball.com being able to support this, and we'll hopefully see you guys next time. Thanks much.